All right, so today what we're going to do is work through some of these problems for both production possibility frontiers and for the comparative advantage problems. Odds are these are not going to be in your slides if you printed them off. That's kind of on purpose because I put a bunch of answers in here too. So if you know the answers, it's not really an exercise to work through. Some of the questions themselves are in the textbook at the end of the chapter. But I put, I think, all the information you need on here. If not, I can write stuff on the board. There's a marker in here today. So let's say we divide all the goods in an economy into two types of goods: capital goods and consumption goods. Capital goods are the stuff we use to make final consumer goods. So it's like the equipment that plants use, the machinery they use, stuff like that. And then consumption goods, obviously, the stuff we buy and we use. So let's draw production possibility frontier to illustrate the trade-off between the two goods. We have capital goods and consumption goods. Now, what kind of line is this going to be? Is it going to be a straight line, or is it going to be like a curved boat outline? Why curved?
I don't know. I feel like maybe you need more capital for you to consume goods, or
Okay. Do we have any other ideas?
straight.
Why straight?
It's like a direct relationship when as capital goods go up, consumer goods go up.
Well, you wouldn't need a straight line for that relationship, even if it's curved, right? It's still,
Yeah.
it's just changing over, depending on where you're at. Anyone else?
Would it depend on the goods being made because you would use more capital goods for certain things, or the entire line would be kind of the solution?
That's an interesting way to look at it. Anyone else? So in this case, it will most likely be a curved line like that. The reason being basically, pretty much like the reason you gave, is that some of the stuff we use to make capital goods are going to be, I don't know, very easy to use for capital goods, but difficult or expensive to use to make final consumer goods. Some of the resources, you may have all capital goods and just switch a little bit of, use a few of those resources for consumption goods, we'll make a lot more consumption goods. So instead of here, where you have 0 consumer goods, so you drop down here just a little bit, you end up making a lot more consumer goods because these resources, just these few resources, are much more suited to make final consumer goods than they are to make capital goods.
Does it matter what is on the X and Y axis?
No, it doesn't. I just picked, I don't know, that's the way I just picked it.
Okay.
So let's suppose there's a technological change, and this has a favorable effect on the production of capital goods. What's going to happen to the line here?
It'll get higher on the Y-axis.
So you think we'll start somewhere up here? So you start here and then go.
Well, are you starting with that now?
Yeah, so
Oh,
we're,
yeah,
we're
so
starting
that's
with this curve, and then there's a technological advancement.
Oh, okay, then, yeah. I'll just-
So you'd say up here, and then what kind of shape is the line going to take?
Still gonna be a curve, but it might not be the same, angle, I guess, there's only affecting capital goods.
So the other point where you hit on the consumer access is going to be,
It's gonna be further along, but,
it is going to be still here. You haven't, well, you can produce more capital goods this period. You haven't done anything to help you make consumer goods. So you end up, nothing has changed for consumer goods right now, but we have an increase in capital goods because of this technological change. So you have some change that affects only one of the two goods. That one that's affected will move, but the other one will stay exactly the same. We can think of like an alternate example where instead of a positive technological change, let's say there's a natural disaster or there's war that actually reduces our ability, and let's say just for capital goods for some reason. Maybe they bomb a mine so we have less natural resources to use that are only used in the capital goods production process. If that's the case, then we'd have the curve shift down like that and go to the same place. So let's say two countries have the same production possibility frontier for these two goods, for capital goods and for consumer goods. One of them only devotes 5% of their resources to capital goods. So they're, say, about here. It's country A. Country B, the second country, devotes 30% towards capital goods. So they're up a little bit higher. So in 10 years, so in the future, which country do we think is going to have greater economic growth? This is something we kind of hinted at before, but I don't think we've dug in too deeply. But it's a question in the chapter, so I wanted to talk about it. That's right. Because they're putting more resources into the means of production, into the actual production process. In the future, they'll be more productive. They'll have more of that stuff able to produce consumer goods. So yes, country B. So we talked about the production possibility frontier moving out over time. So country A in 10 years may be about here. But country B out like that, because they've devoted more resources toward things that are good for growth. There's other uses for production possibility frontiers. We normally think of, obviously, just production, but it can show other types of relationships. Something we worked with in grad school. Actually, so Econ 101, I learned production possibility frontiers. Spent like 2 classes on it. Never saw it again until grad school. And we talked about people's decision making. So we have work up here and leisure always mess that up. And leisure down there. It's representing the same idea that there's trade-offs between these two things we do. Now we're talking about in the production process, and we'll use it to help us with international trade a little bit later. We can also use it in our own lives. So how much work versus how much leisure we want to have. And it represents, that trade-off between the two. That when you give up one, you're necessarily going to get more of the other.
Why is that bowed?
That's a good question. I'm trying to think. Because it's not different resources involved between work and leisure. I think the idea is, say you start up here with all work, then you move down just a little, you work a little bit less, and you have a lot more time available for leisure activity. Because you're limited by time. You're right, that probably would be an example of a flat, with a straight curve. Because there's not, I can't think of a reason for that to be curved. I think that was just being lazy and using the old curve on there. Okay, next question. Here's a production possibility frontier for the same thing, capital goods and consumption goods. Which of these points, A, B, C, D, and E, are unattainable for whatever society this is? E, that's right. Anything to the right of the curve out here is impossible to make. Which points are efficient? That's right. Any point on this line is going to be efficient. And what point is inefficient? A. That's the easiest one because there's only one left. You can produce anywhere inside the production possibility frontier, but if you do that, you're wasting time or wasting whatever resources you have. And then at which point is the country's future growth rate going to be the highest? You said B? That's right. Again, because they're producing the most capital goods there. So it's going to pay off in the future.
Why would it be like C? It's in the middle. Yeah, this is in the middle.
Because you can still like move towards point B, and you'll have more capital goods. You'll have more investment in factories that are able to produce like more efficiently. C would probably, now obviously this is more of a normative judgment, C would probably be a better place to live than B because you're able to actually enjoy some stuff. And D would probably be even better because again, you can enjoy more of the final goods. But there's it's the idea that there's a trade-off between the investment now and stuff for the future and enjoying the present. I really wish they'd have placed those points a little bit differently so that A was a little bit higher than point D on the capital goods side. Because that would be interesting to see a point that's inefficient, but that would actually lead to higher future growth. So if A was like still inside production possibility right here, but it was like up here, you would end up with higher long-run growth than in B, because you're putting more. Even though you're wasting a lot, you're putting more into what?
Like, maybe more efficient, or not more efficient, but having a greater growth and less efficient.
You can if you spend more on like the capital goods. Pretty much every society is not producing, no matter like how you break it down, on the production possibility frontier. Like there's always ways we can be more efficient, or better ways to combine resources, but we're trying to move as close as possible to that. Okay, and I just threw another slide of why sometimes we see production possibility frontiers that curve. Because, you know, like I said, resources are better suited to one task than another. So if you switch the ones that are best suited, so these first, moving from point A to point B, moving from making tanks to automobiles, those things might be like seat belts or seats, the car, I don't know, like XM radios. Those sort of things are much more well suited to producing automobiles than they are to tanks. So when you move those resources over, you're going to produce a lot of automobiles. But then as you move on, they become less and less well suited to automobiles, and eventually, when you get down here to the bottom, the last, you can use, you have to give up a lot of tanks, use all those resources, only get a couple additional cars. Those are things that aren't typically good at being used to produce cars. Okay, so let's work through another example. So let's use the data below to draw a production possibility frontier. We have Econ on the y-axis and chemistry on the x-axis. All right, so how are we going to draw this production possibility frontier? You think straight line or curved line? You think straight?
I like what you measure, it's like time. So
It's-
spend more time studying for econ. Be higher for game.
But the more you study, do you get better at studying or worse at studying that subject?
I was on the left, this is school or something.
Yeah, well, the score is based on. Yeah, so the score is like determined by like how much you study.
How you study for an hour, you do better, a lot better than if you study for an hour at all.
So,
But then,
so the first hour of studying is really valuable, and then
yeah.
you get less and less back.
It's it's still valuable, but it's less valuable than the first.
Yeah, that's what we're gonna see. And now, given those midterm scores, what point are we gonna have up here for econ?
But
95, that's, in this example, the best we can do. And then for chemistry, what's going to be the point out here? 91. And then down here, the origin will be 70 for chemistry and 75 for econ, because those are the lowest we can score for those. So what it's saying is, right there it says the midterm score for choice A. You can get 95 in your economics exam and a 70 on the chemistry exam. So 95 here and 70 there. If you go all the way to the other end, you can get a 91 on your chemistry exam. You'll be getting a 75 on your econ exam. All right, So now what is it? Label point C and point D. So which point is going to be higher? Higher towards Econ. That's right. So we got C, say up here, and D right down there. It's awkward asking you guys these, like, I don't know, like how to draw this question, but I assume no one's going to want to get up and draw on the board. So if we're going to label that, point C is what? 90 for econ, and what is it for chemistry? 84. I was just being lazy and didn't want to look over there while writing. And point D somewhere more down there, so that's what? 86 econ. Or 88. So if we wanted to increase our chemistry score by 4 points, and we're at point C, what's the opportunity cost going to be? That's right. So if we want to increase our score by 4, and we're at point C, that's moving from 84 to 88. So that change is going to be 4 points. Moving from point C to point D, we're moving from 90 to 86. 90 minus 86, again, equals 4. So if we want to get 4 points on chem, we need to give up 4 points on econ. So that's your opportunity cost at this point in the graph. Because this is curved, we don't have the constant opportunity cost we do with the straight line. So when do you guys think it would make sense to focus like all your studying in this situation? Like these are the scores you get. Focus all your studying on econ or all your studying on chemistry? So your average is generally better. That's one way. That's one way to do it. Another is, I guess it depends on what the benefit of doing well on one versus well on the other. So if you've got like a guaranteed A in chemistry, and this is the last exam, you can focus more of your energy on studying economics, especially if your grade's lower in that class. I mean, during finals week, we've all made that trade-off before, right? Okay. So just an example of highlight comparative advantage. Anyone here like baseball? All right, I hate baseball, but I'm from Williamsport, like home of Little League World Series. So I like grew up like everyone talking about baseball to me. Babe Ruth is a really good example of comparative advantage. He was a really good pitcher when he played for the Red Sox. But he was such a good hitter, they had to move him out into the outfield for a little bit. Then they traded him to the Yankees and got that curse that they couldn't win until like, I don't know, like was it 04 or 08 or something. Anyway, the Yankees made him a full-time outfielder because there was a much lower opportunity cost of him being in the outfield. He was so much better than everyone else. He had that comparative advantage over the other hitters for the Yankees. Like he had 54 home runs, the next hit 11. Meanwhile, they already had a bunch of good pitchers, so he didn't have the comparative advantage in pitching. He had to hit it. All right. We'll move into comparative advantage after a quick break. Did you guys see the new Dancing with the Stars? Carol Baskins is on it.
No. It was on the radio today on like drive here, and he was like, I want to know how you can put somebody on the TV show and make them famous, but you don't even know if she actually killed her husband. Like, oh my God.
There's not really anyone else good on there this season, at least that I know I was just reading this before class. Someone from the Bachelorette, Caitlin Bristow. Oh, AJ McLean for the Backstreet Boys. Oh, Nelly. Okay, so there's a couple of people.
When does it start?
I have no idea. That's gonna be so entertaining to see her out there. All right. What question was it? What's something you guys think is super overrated?
Stranger Things, the TV show.
I still haven't seen Stranger Things.
I like the first season, but the other seasons weren't fantastic.
It was one of the things I like missed the boat on, and like everyone got too excited and talked about it too much for me. So then I just started to not like it for some reason.
I didn't listen at first when I first started watching it. I was with a bunch of people and I went home and watched it by myself. And after the first episode was so confusing because I had no idea what was going on. I felt like there was like no backstory, and then I started watching it and I'm like, oh, now everything makes sense.
Penn State University meme is very overrated. Living there is not as great as it used to be because the campus is actually pretty not attractive. Sorry if I offended anyone who was looking at Penn State.
I agree with you. I did 2 years there and then I transferred. It's
Yeah.
terrible.
The campus itself is huge though, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's like miserable to like walk to class and stuff?
I had an 8 a.m. and I had to walk like a mile. It was terrible.
That sucks. That's like insult to like having an 8 a.m.
Yeah, it was absolutely horrible. And I actually took Econ there. It didn't transfer for some reason, but my class was like 850 people. So like I had to stand in line for like 20 minutes just to ask a question. It was terrible.
Sounds miserable. Was it like a big auditorium?
Yeah, it was like this giant amphitheater. It was huge. It was terrible.
I can't imagine having like a class in a place like that.
They had like this weird like bone microphone ball thing that they would like throw around that you would like use to answer questions and you had to like get passed up the rows just for you to like answer your question because no one could hear.
That's weird.
Yeah, it was terrible.
Sheets food.
Sheets food?
Yeah.
You're like a Wawa person, or?
No, it's just that it's overpriced. Like one time I bought a sandwich, well not one time, but I bought a sandwich from there and it said, add onion rings for an extra $1. I thought I was gonna get a side of onion rings with my sandwich. It was one singular onion ring on my sandwich that I paid $1 for. So I was a little bit upset.
When I first got up here, everyone said, you can never get to Sheets.
It's really not that great. Like,
It's just convenient. That's why everyone here goes there.
yeah. And it's good.
It's open late and it's closed.
And-
15.
Yeah, but Morning Crescent's only like.
Yeah, Crescent's not that. I don't know. I hear all these people fighting about Sheets versus Wawa, and I really don't see a difference.
Royal Farms was,
Waterston. Where's Royal Farms? Maryland? Okay.
Where's Wawa?
That's like the Philly area, like Eastern PA. All right, so let's jump back into it. So for the comparative advantage problems, here I just have the steps listed for how you want to do these. So first, you calculate the opportunity costs for both of the parties involved. And the one with the comparative advantage is going to be the one that produces at the lowest opportunity cost. So you just compare the opportunity costs for each good, for each side, and whichever has the lowest for that good has the comparative advantage. And then when you want to show how trading can make each country better off. You assume each country specializes, so they just produce the one good that they have the comparative advantage at. And then when you, normally for these problems, you're just given what the trade is going to be, but the trade is always going to be between each producer's opportunity cost. That's the only way that they'd be willing to trade with each other. So then you compare a point on the production possibility frontier or the chart where the production would take place without trade and with trade, and then you see which one gets more resources. Or more of the final good, sorry. Okay, so let's say Canada and the US produce honey and vinegar. Which country has the comparative advantage in each good? For these problems, for like the stuff we do in class and for the exam, the opportunity cost will be constant. So you don't have to worry about like having the curved PPF and having to pick a spot on there. No matter where, like which one you pick, the opportunity cost will be the same. So for Canada, moving from honey to vinegar, moving from point 1 to point 2, to make 10 units of honey, how much vinegar are they going to have to get off?
15 units of honey.
The 15. So we have 10 to 15, that's going to be 1 to 1.5. So you're giving up, the opportunity cost for 1 unit of honey is 1.5 vinegar. Now for the United States, what's the opportunity cost for vinegar going to be? So you move from 0 to 10 units of honey, you're moving from 50 to 40 units of vinegar.
10.
So you're giving up 10, and that 10 to 10 is going to be, let's go to 1 vinegar. So who has the comparative advantage in vinegar? US. They have the lower opportunity cost, so they've got the comparative advantage. Now, if we wanted to figure out the opportunity cost for honey, it's just going to be the opposite of this. So instead of 1.5 divided by 1, it's 1 divided by 1.5. So for Canada, the opportunity cost is going to be 0.67 honey, and for the US, it'll be 1 honey, 1 unit of honey. So which one has a comparative advantage? A lower opportunity cost. Canada. So let's say the US is making 13 tons of honey and 15 tons of vinegar. And Canada makes, I did write this backwards. Let's assume Canada is making 13, or 30 and 15. US is making 40 and 10. So can they make themselves better from trade? Can both make themselves better off? So yeah, US produces 50 honey. They specialize in their honey because they have comparative advantage. And then Canada specializes in vinegar. And then we trade with each other. Now let's assume the trade takes place at 30 honey for 40 vinegar. But it can take place at a lot of different levels. It could be 32 honeys for 40 vinegar, 28 honey for 40 vinegar, 36 honey for 48 vinegar. Um, as long as the ratio between those is between the opportunity cost. So we trade 30 honey for 40 vinegar. Canada will end up with 30 units of honey, 20 units of vinegar. So what they end up with 5 more units of vinegar and the same amount of honey. Meanwhile, the US ends up with 20 units of honey, 40 units of vinegar. So they end up with 10 more units of honey, same with vinegar.
What confusing that? What you just said.
Okay, so the US has, so they have 50 honey and 0 vinegar. And Canada has 0 honey and 60, right? 60 vinegar. So they trade 30 honey for 40 vinegar. Minus 30 plus 40 plus 30 minus 40. We end up with 20 honey and 40 vinegar for the US, and 30 honey and 20 vinegar for Canada.
Okay.
So without trading, they're right here, 30 and 15 for Canada. So they're no better off with honey, but they've got 5 more vinegar. And the US is what? 140. So they end up no better for vinegar, 10 better for honey. All right. Yeah, okay, this one has more answers for you guys. So let's do one last example. I want you guys to all take this example to work through the problem, and then we'll talk about it together at the end. How are we doing? All right, so let me ask, who has a comparative advantage in producing wine? Germany? What were your opportunity costs? What was that?
So it was 0.33 for Germany.
0.33 for Germany. And what was France?
Um,
How did you get the 0.16? So when France moves from producing 0 units of wine to 1 unit of wine, they're giving up 2 units of schnitzel. So they would end up with a opportunity cost of 0.5 schnitzel for that additional unit of wine. So Germany would end up with the lower opportunity cost to produce schnitzel. And for France, and for, for the wine, to move from 0 to 1 unit of wine, they're moving from 8 to 6 units of schnitzel. So it's a 2 unit change. So the opportunity cost is 2. They have to give up 2 schnitzels to produce 1 more wine. Whereas for Germany, they have to give up 3 units of schnitzel. So 15 minus 12 is 3, just for that 1 unit, for the 1 unit of wine. So their opportunity cost to produce wine for Germany is 3 units of schnitzel, whereas for France, it's only 2 units of schnitzel. So France has the lower opportunity cost of producing wine. Of producing wine. Because to go from 0 to 1 unit, they're giving up 2 units of schnitzel. For Germany, to go from 0 to 1, they're giving up 3 units of schnitzel. So that 1 unit of wine in Germany is relatively more costly. They're giving up more in order to get that 1 unit. All right, try to get this in before the end of class. So assuming that Germany and France produces 1 unit of wine, 6 of schnitzel. Germany, 3 units of wine, 6 of schnitzel. These are both on the points that they have, like on their production possibilities. If France specialized in wine, they can make 4 units of wine. If Germany specializes in schnitzel, they can make 15 units of schnitzel. And then let's say they trade 3 wine for 7 schnitzel. When they do that, Germany goes from 15 units, they produce 15 units and they trade 7, so they leave them with 8 units themselves. And then France having 0 units of schnitzel, they end up with 7 schnitzel. France trades the 3 things of wine in Germany, so they drop from 4 to 1. Germany goes from 0 to 3. Germany ends up with 2 more schnitzels. France ends up with 2 more schnitzels. So they both end up making themselves better off through this trade. Well, we can ignore these. Maybe talk about that question later. I'm sorry for such a boring mathy class. I haven't figured out a fun way to teach math yet. Besides just put your head down and get through it as quick as possible.